Welcome to Family Addiction Coaching, a podcast about families supporting a loved one with addiction. Each episode will provide insight into a real family's experience, what families find useful and not, what is available in the community, and what would help make their journey easier. Similar to what happens in our coaching service, we'll discuss how families have encouraged their loved one into recovery, as well as their own family recovery. We'll also discuss harm reduction, an especially useful approach for those with no current interest in recovery. I'm your host, Patrick Doyle of Family Addiction Coaching. With a master's degree in social work, I'm licensed by the state of Massachusetts and comply with the strict code of ethics of the National Association of Social Workers. Very humbled and grateful for the opportunity to bring families with addiction into the conversation at the Health Professionals in Recovery podcast, episode 8, which hosts Sean Fogler and Bill Kinkle enthusiastically supported to also be released as a family addiction coaching podcast. Their recognition of the power and recovery capital of their families demonstrates the insights of Sean and Bill unique among experts. Both Sean Fogler and Bill Kinkle are in sustained recovery from serious addiction and are also active in many advocacy initiatives. I've learned the mark of a great podcast episode is when all are involved with the learning, hosts, guests, and listeners. You'll want to subscribe to and review their Health Professionals in Recovery podcast on Apple Podcasts and at healthprosinrecovery.com. A big thank you shout out of appreciation to listener The Himabaws, who wrote this review on Apple Podcasts. Finally, a helpful podcast for loved ones. Finally, a podcast that also shares a loved one's experience and perspective of addiction journey. I'll be listening to all of the episodes of this podcast. Trish's story in episode 1 helped me realize I'm not alone in the way things are playing out in my own family in reference to substance use disorder. Patrick Doyle is a very good and supportive listener. Thank you, the Himabaws. We promise to read your reviews in future episodes.
There's so much power when you harness it. I mean, when, with healthy families, which most families with addiction are totally healthy and loving, and when you can make use of that and, have meetings to break the ice and talk about what it's going to be like when the person comes home again, it just makes so much sense.
Welcome to Health Professionals in Recovery, a podcast for healthcare practitioners interested in substance use disorder, harm reduction, and recovery from addiction. Our hope is to provide education and support for those struggling in silence, recovering, and those who care for patients who suffer with substance use disorder. For more resources, please visit our website at www.healthprosinrecovery.com or follow us on Twitter at HPIR Podcast. And now, the hosts of Health Professionals in Recovery, Sean Fogler and Bill Kinkle.
Welcome to Health Professionals in Recovery. I'm Sean Fogler.
And I'm Bill Kinkle.
And today we have a very special guest, Patrick Doyle. Patrick is a life coach and advisor who helps people with problems, decisions, and goal attainment in daily life. His family coaching is highly focused on you helping your loved one, your family, and yourself. Patrick Doyle has been working with both families and individuals suffering from substance use disorders, depression, and other behavioral health issues for 30 years. He earned a master's in social work in 1986 from Boston College and is a licensed independent clinical social worker in Massachusetts. Patrick follows the NASW Code of Ethics. Patrick is a qualified substance abuse professional according to U.S. DOT regulations. In addition to working as a senior clinician at employee assistance programs, Patrick has provided coaching in his independent practice. Patrick served for several years as substance misuse consultant for the Boston Red Sox organization. And we're really excited to have him on the show today. And so welcome, Patrick.
Well, thank you so much, Sean and Bill. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Oh, we appreciate it too. I thought we could start by you elaborating a little bit about your practice, what you do day to day, and what some of your interests are.
Absolutely. And one thing, if I may, I just want to tell you guys that I love your podcast, and I love your advocacy work in general that you're doing, and the way that you both are putting yourself out there. I mean, you really are my heroes, and you are really role models for people in recovery and for people who want to give back, and through sharing lived experience. Some of it very, it must be awkward or maybe not to talk about, but it's pretty amazing, the journeys, the paths that your lives have taken, and how you've gotten yourselves into just a really positive recovery life. And so it's just really amazing, and something that I've been admiring greatly for the past few years as soon as I came across you guys. So this is pretty exciting for me. So thank you for everything that you're doing by putting that out there.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Feelings mutual. Great respect for the work that you do as well. Looking forward to hearing more about it.
Yeah, well, thanks. And it's to make a long story boring. I've been working in mental health and addictions for 30 years or so, and in terms of how I've come to this place where I am really passionate about helping families gain recovery from the impact of addiction on them, and also many times helping the person with the addiction gain health and recovery as well. I would have to go back. I mean, basically, I was raised in a very loving family, a very large family. I'm one of 7 kids. And so it was also a pretty high stress family environment. And maybe just having 7 kids and juggling everything, it was a lot of responsibilities on my parents. And so it was it was a loving environment, and if we broke the rules, it could be maybe a bit harsh environment as well in terms of discipline and such. And I remember I remember back in the day, I wished that my family could have gotten some sort of professional help. Maybe family therapy, family support of some kind, some sort of counseling help to help us, my parents and us, kind of manage the challenges of life. We never got that kind of help. And so when I got professional help myself through counseling, and started my recovery from depression, I got really interested in that whole process, and I was really intrigued by the therapeutic relationship and how counseling could be so helpful for people. Studied it in college and worked in the field, and decided that that was my life's passion, and felt like that was what I was meant to do with my life. And I wanted to give back, and I thought I might have a knack for it. Went to graduate school and worked on an inpatient dual diagnosis hospital unit, and became very interested in not only behavioral health, but especially addiction, and maybe even more than that, dual diagnosis, addiction when there's a co-occurring disorder. And then bringing up to more recent years, I've always enjoyed working with addiction. I've worked in a variety of settings, and I've always enjoyed working with families. And that was a family treatment, and family being involved in treatment of addiction was part of my early training. And I got to experience the power and the value of having the family involved. And as time went by, I wasn't seeing much of that family involvement in addiction treatment, and I wasn't seeing a lot of resources or assistance or help or relief for families that were really going through a very difficult time with addiction in the family. And so it occurred to me that it was an underserved population, if you will. And there are how many millions of families with addiction in them at one time or another. And so I've devoted my career to helping families gain their own recovery from the impact of addiction on them, and spreading accurate information about treatment and also about substance use and addiction. And so it's become my passion, and we've had a lot of success with the families that I've worked with, and it's very exciting to see a family go through a transformation and get into their own recovery. So we're getting really positive results, and it's just exciting, and I consider it a real privilege. I'm humbled by the ability that I have to have an impact in the health and recovery of a family that's really suffering.
Yeah, I think the family is critical. It's a critical piece that's not discussed enough, and it's not addressed enough. I know for me, my family was critical in my recovery and still is to this day, and it's been 5 years.
Awesome.
And things really change, right? I mean, the individual's one piece of the puzzle, and often, the other pieces, there's just so much else there that affects everything, and even the individual, as they change and they get into recovery and they're changing, everything around them is changing, and it's like a puzzle where the shapes of the pieces are always changing, and it can be really challenging. And I know, like, where I went to treatment, they had a family program, but it was it was just, I guess it's what they could do, but it was, excuse me, just was about a week long, and you just can't do much, right? Like once you leave treatment, the real journey begins, and I don't think we do enough once people leave treatment to help families heal and address that. And I think it's really powerful, what you're doing. I think it's necessary. It's a necessary part of the solution. And so, yeah, it's amazing. I mean, do you find it's got to be really challenging? Like, when I think about it, I know the family's a critical piece. And I know you've probably seen some, success stories, but there's got to be other challenges too, right? When you bring 2 or 3 other people in to the picture, right?
Well, I can't imagine. I just can't even fathom what that must be like, honestly. I mean, having gone through 32 treatments, 16 of them, I was married, and my wife wasn't a part of any of it. And even when I got out of treatment, so I got out of treatment right into 90 and 90 in a 12-step program, and I distinctly remember hearing every day people talk about how I have a program now, so my life is going to be so much better, but my wife, she doesn't have a program, and until she gets her own program, you're never going to be on the same page. And in some ways, it created this division. It wasn't until I sort of abandoned that and we started working together as a couple and started being really honest about what led to my substance use. What was addiction like? Why did I keep doing it? What was, what's early recovery like? What am I struggling with? Until we both got on the same page and started really dissecting what had happened and where we needed to heal. We would have been divorced, and I'm just still fascinated that nothing was ever done to bring us together, to at least prepare for that. And so the idea that you do this, Patrick, is just so, one, it's mind-blowing, because nobody does it, but it's just, but it's also duh moment. Like, of course.
Yeah.
This should be incorporated into addiction treatment. And so I'm really fascinated. Like, how does that work? What, like Sean was just asking, what's that dynamic like when you bring people together? And I'd be really interested to know the difference between the parent and children relationships versus spouses or couples and ones with children. Like, what are the unique challenges that each one presents for you?
And let me just add one more thing. The reason why I asked that is because when I got into treatment, the strategy was to isolate me from my family,
Yes.
right, and limit contact.
Yep.
And then even as I was leaving, and I was in treatment for 4 months, even when I was leaving, there was a lot of questions about, is the home environment going to be okay? Maybe she's not right for you. In fact, it was really kind of stated pretty firmly that she's not, right? That you guys need to go your separate ways because she's not good for you.
That's
and so, which is shocking. Like, I spent 4 months somewhere. They don't know anything about her, and they're making these, broad statements, where I really, I came home and I was very, like, I was on the defensive and I was constantly questioning, and maybe that was, a good thing. Maybe it wasn't. I mean, I don't know, but anyhow, so back to Bill's questions and the strategies and the challenges. I would love to hear them.
That's outrageous. It's disturbing, and yet I've heard that a lot, Sean. That there are as we've discussed before, the addiction treatment industry is very traditional. It's been around for 85 years. Well, AA has been around for 85 years or so, and the addiction treatment industry was basically modeled on the 12 steps of AA. And there are certain notions that have come out of that, which what we know now is that they don't make any sense. And like certain terms like enabling and codependency. Now, codependency never was a thing. It was very popular and you still hear it a lot, but there was a tendency in the addiction treatment industry to fault the family, blame the family, whether it be a spouse, whether it be a parent, or even an adult child, but the family, as if the family caused the addiction, and to isolate the person with the addiction from their family, no matter how supportive the family is. Now, I don't understand where that came from, but it's definitely the rule out there in the treatment world. It's not an exception. And what I found much more useful is to gather information from the family as well as the patient, the person with the addiction, so that you have a broader perspective. If you think about it, if a person's had a serious substance issue to have required them to go into a residential program, they haven't been really aware of what's been going on lately a lot of the time, right? Because they are in an altered state of consciousness. And so they're not always able to pick up on subtle cues or see what's going on around them. And people in addiction tend to be highly focused on getting the substance, using the substance, and then how are they going to get some more? So they tend to lose track of what's going on with other people in the family. So to get information, collateral information, and for example, the first episode of my podcast, Family Addiction Coaching Podcast, we interviewed Bill's wife, and it was really interesting to hear how she was virtually totally shut out of her husband's treatment, and that's the rule. That's what tends to happen. And so how how an individualized treatment plan can be developed without having collateral information from credible sources such as a loving family. How you can develop an individualized treatment plan, I don't know. I don't know that there are a lot of individualized treatment plans that are really developed. But in programs where I have worked, where one program I worked in as the social worker on an inpatient residential unit for substance use disorder, my job was to meet with every family once a week for an hour, initially to gather information and hear the family's perspective and bring that into the treatment of that individual. But also beyond that, it was supporting the family, helping them understand about the current treatment plan, helping them understand about the needs of the patient when they were approaching discharge and what was going to happen after discharge. And we saw so much benefit from doing that. And for example, people in early recovery, they generally are, for the most part, they're generally feeling fairly positive about their recovery. They're feeling pretty good. They're feeling better than they have in a long time, maybe. And when they are discharged and they go home, they don't understand why people are still mad at them, you know, because I mean, they've left the past in the past. And so if they're getting any kind of like tension or distance or anger from family members that the behavior of addiction might have been harmful to, they don't get it. And that's understandable. And the treatment programs, they don't really prepare people. So one of the things I started doing when I was working with the patients was just educating them on that and say, you know, it'll really be helpful if you understand that while you are feeling good, positive, optimistic, and that's really useful in early recovery, you know, stay with that. It's also important that you understand that when there's been a pattern of collateral damage that the addiction has caused, not only did it hurt you as the patient, but it's hurt your family. It takes time for people to come to terms with that and to even understand it. So just be careful, be aware of that. And we would coach the patients on how to anticipate for that, and also how to try to open the door on discussing that and learning how to accept that kind of feedback and how they can best respond to that so that they hopefully still maintain their positivity and their commitment to recovery and with following through with aftercare and such and living a healthier lifestyle. It's also they need to be sensitive and they oftentimes need assistance with dealing with resentments that may still be out there and might still be out there for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I wish that I had something like that. I mean, Trish and I, my wife and Trish, who you talked about earlier, that you interviewed her on your podcast, but I mean, we pretty much white-knuckled it and winged it through early recovery. And that was a rough year. It would have been the transition would have been, it probably would have never been seamless from inpatient to home and outpatient, but it would have made it so much easier had someone done the work that you do, at least some type of preparation, some type of groundwork, and some type, at least the beginning stages of a plan of where we're going to move forward to. I mean, when I got out of treatment, we had no idea. Trish had no idea what to expect. I mean, I was so beat down at that point. Like, I didn't really know what to expect. I wasn't sure if our marriage was going to survive. I didn't know if we were going to, retain custody of our foster son at the time. We were in the later stages of adoption. There were so many things that were up in the air, and none of the counseling staff at any of the treatment centers I went to had any communication whatsoever with her. And so, I spent these 30 days in treatment, or quote unquote treatment. I spent in a treatment center, building, painting pumpkins and doing yoga and all that kind of stuff, but not really working on things therapeutically that I had identified at that point. And so it was a really weird, hard transition, because I felt like I had a really good, solid hold on myself at that point. I really started to understand what makes me tick. I started to understand what drove my use to begin with. And at that point, I was so willing to talk about it, because, for me, it was this great epiphany of, like, I finally figured out why I use drugs and what the reason is. And when I came home, I was so excited to tell my wife about it, and she did not want to hear it. At that point, she wanted security. She wanted just something solid in our life. And after 16 times, for her, it was like, yeah, okay, when's it going to happen again? Are we going to be going through this again?
Right.
So we were on completely different ends of the universe. And, I really don't know how we survived, because it should have fallen apart. That shouldn't have worked.
Right.
I think that's why I go back to so many times about what drives my recovery and what sustains my recovery, and what was the initial catalyst was our love for one another, like her unconditional love towards me and mine towards hers, and a commitment that we're going to get through this. But my gosh, how do you overlook that as a counselor or a therapist or a clinician? It boggles my mind how that was overlooked.
Yeah. I think the answer is as simple as most of the staff working in residential treatment facilities have virtually no training. They don't have advanced degrees. They don't get good supervision. And most of them are in recovery, pretty early recovery. And they feel good about recovery and how they got sober. And they feel like they can share that with other people. And so that's understandable. And the facilities, it's not an insurance reimbursable type of service to get family involved in the treatment. There's no CPT code for that, getting family involved in treatment. So they don't get paid for it. So it's all overhead cost. They don't understand how important it is because of their limited training. And so that's what happens. And I agree with you, Bill. It's really amazing how you both, and your love for each other, and the health that you each had, even though you might not have felt very healthy just leaving the program, but there was obviously health, and there was something inside of you that kept you working at it, and also within your wife that kept her working at it, and somehow you found a way to learn how to trust in to overcome that despite the odds. So you guys did a great job with that. Many people, maybe even most people, they don't fare so well. And you did ask earlier about spouses of people in treatment, and what we're seeing is that there's not much, if any, recognition or any support given to a spouse of someone in treatment. The whole industry and the current narrative is that people become addicted when they're, 15 years old to 18 years old or so, and that the vast majority of people with addiction are teenagers, maybe real young adults, before people are likely to get married. And that's not the case at all. But the treatment industry is molded towards that stereotype of the young person who started using before the frontal cortex got developed and is causing all sorts of difficulties. And so that's the way that the treatment industry is looking at it. But there's so many people of, say, the middle years, if you will, suffering with addiction who need treatment. And there's so many seniors who are in active addiction, and there's not much done for seniors either. They're really unrecognized, and we, as a society, it seems like we don't think of seniors as almost as if they're not capable of developing an addiction illness.
It's fascinating. It's something that I never thought about consciously, but it's interesting that, so my experience, Trish's experience in treatment, that everything was very much geared and structured and framed at looking at parents. Like everybody, the family that came in were addressed as parents for your kid. Like I was sort of an anomaly, being an older married person with a family. But thinking about the people who listen to this or potentially listen to this podcast, health professionals, physicians, nurses, PAs, nurse practitioners, whoever else, the population that we're speaking to is more likely to be people who have families who are older, that their parents aren't involved in their lives. And I would imagine that many of them were probably really surprised when they ended up in a treatment center, how much it was geared, one, that they were going to be treated as an adolescent, because you hear that nonsense all the time, that your maturity and your growth stopped the first time you did drugs, and it's been sustained there. It's been trapped there forever, and which is nonsense. But you hear that all the time. But I mean, you're treated as an adolescent, and you're treated as a kid, and everything is, nobody really knows what to do when you have a spouse. But our audience are people that most likely are husbands, wives, who have families and mortgages and all the other things. Probably most of their life has been a life filled with responsibility and meeting expectations, and valuing responsibility in their life. So it's just interesting to me. I hadn't really thought about it before, about our particular subgroup as health professionals, like our recovery planning needs are different than the general population, I would imagine. And there's also no treatment center that's set up for that. Now, there are treatment centers that have programs specifically designed for nurses or physicians, but that really generally just means, you might have a group 3 times a week that's the nurse group, and you get to bitch and complain about being in a program. It's not really to address what are the unique things about a health professional who struggles with substance use and is now entering into recovery. What specific things should we tailor to them different than the general population? I even think it's difficult as a health professional to be put in the general population in a treatment center with a bunch of other people. I found it extraordinarily difficult to have someone who had such a high functioning career as a nurse, someone that I valued my career, I was respected in my career, and nobody that I met in treatment really could understand what that was like. So I was either outcast from the population, or I had to sort of hide and put on a mask or a costume to blend in with the other population. And so it's just, I know that's sort of off the topic of families, but it's just interesting that most treatment centers are going to be geared towards parents, but the population that we're talking to isn't. We're most likely all family people.
Right. And isn't it just another barrier that we put in the way of a health professional feeling comfortable asking for help? Because it's along with all the other barriers that we put in the way for health professionals, they don't fit that stereotypical, 18 to 23-year-old youth category, that assumption, that bias that we have. And so that it's just another barrier that makes it even more difficult. And as you say, then they end up in a program that doesn't have anything for them and their unique needs. And I'm sure that it keeps a lot of people in the health professions from recognizing addiction, from being able to accept it and accept the need for help and to reach out for help, because they're not seeing it recognized.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I have a little different take. I actually, when I went to treatment, looked for a program that did not have health professionals in it, because I didn't want to be seen as special. and different. I just wanted to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
And I don't really know where that came from, but I thought it would be healthier for me, because my experience with my colleagues was there was a lot of ego, a lot of narcissism, a lot of, this exceptionalism that we talk about, which I found very difficult to deal with because of my childhood and how my father was. But I looked for a program where there weren't people like me, and I got into that program and it was going well. And I remember like halfway through the therapist saying, so people found out I was a physician, and suddenly I became the helper again, right? Everybody was turning to me with questions, and the therapist said, Sean, you're taking on your role as a physician, like you're here for you to help you heal and address your stuff, and you're taking care of everybody else. And I didn't even realize I was doing it.
Well, I mean, it's inherent. I think that happens naturally. Sean, let me ask you this. Before you went into treatment, had you ever gone to any like mutual aid, like 12-step meetings or anything like that beforehand?
Didn't know what they were.
That's fascinating because
in my 40s with a raging substance use disorder and didn't have a clue. And I remember getting down to Florida where I went to treatment, and then them taking us on a bus to the first AA meeting and going to this big room, and there was like a disco ball in the middle of the room. It was this massive, just this massive venue. It was a very large AA meeting. And I was looking around like, who are these people? Am I on Mars or something? Right.
Wow.
And thinking to myself, I don't have anything in common with these people. And within 2 or 3 days, I was like, boy, I'm exactly like everybody in here, and this is my spot, and I didn't at first, this whole higher power thing, I had a problem with it. So, they were like, anything can be your higher power. And I made the disco ball my higher power. Now, eventually I came along. Well, it's great. Well, I still was out of my mind. I had used stimulants for a long time. And it took me a while to come down. But the fog didn't really clear for 30 days. And the family was an aside. And I mean, in the defense of the program, and I think families are important, we have to deal with it, but in defense of the program, like I did need to kind of be selfish and just focus on me at first. Now, I thought the 2 15-minute phone calls a week seemed pretty strict, but I thought that was just the way it is until my roommate, who had been in prison, said, you realize you get more phone calls in prison. And then I was like, wow, this is bad, right?
It's true. I mean, the reason I had asked though is with you saying that you didn't want to be different, you didn't want anything special. I was wondering if it was related to the you think you're terminally unique kind of nonsense that you typically hear in recovery circles, and that I was wondering if you were just conditioned already to think there's nothing spectacular, there's nothing unique about me, I'm just like everybody else.
That was the reason I asked.
I wanted to be like everybody else. I didn't want to be the helper. I was tired of carrying the weight, my own weight and everybody else's weight. And I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't see it modeled. My colleagues didn't ask for help. In my family, people didn't ask for help. It was suck it up, and just, keep moving forward, whatever it is. You don't know the answer, make it up. All the classic stuff. But I wanted to let go of it. I really, like when I went into treatment, I had never been before. I was ready to let it go, but things were bad. I mean, my wife was leaving, understandably. She was ready to take the kids and leave because, the way I was behaving was very toxic and very damaging, and I wasn't even aware of it. I always say I remember her standing in the kitchen looking at me. I don't even know who you are anymore. I don't recognize you. And me saying, what do you mean it's me? But finally having the realization that, wow, something is wrong, really wrong, because I don't even recognize that I am not me anymore, right? Like I believed her words that you are not yourself anymore. I finally believed. And that's when I was like, okay, I gotta get help, and I went away, and that was a powerful thing. And for me, I think I did at first need that separation from family. I think family became really important and is still important to this day, to fuel my recovery and stability and having that, unconditional love. But I think early on, and I was away for 4 months, I know it's a long time, but I needed it. I did need, when I was down there, I wanted to leave every month, but the fog didn't clear for 30 days. And then I really got, just got started to work. And then 4 months in, I was ready to leave. But then the real work, just begins when you leave. So you said something earlier, Patrick, about this stuff takes time, right? And it really takes time, and we all, especially me, I want it now,
right.
And I want things to change, and we'll be like, okay, the past is the past. But I wasn't even aware of the damage that I had caused. And even today, I occasionally get glimpses of, wow, I can't believe X, or I can't believe Y. I'm still gaining insight into how my behavior affected things around me. It takes a long time, and the healing takes a long time. And it is an up and down, it's a journey that's up and down, and still goes up and down. I think it's going to be a lifetime, right? But, you keep moving forward and growing, but you have to be I hate these AA slogans, but they say a slow recovery is a good recovery. And I do believe that to be true. I really did. At first, I didn't understand it. I didn't want it to be true. I still today don't necessarily want it to be true, but it's really true. This stuff is, and if you think about it, it makes sense, right? For 40 years, I was acting a certain way, had developed these survival strategies, and in a few months in treatment and a few years of recovery, I think everything's going back to normal. It's just, that's right. It doesn't make any sense. It's going to take time.
Yeah.
So I think patience is, I'm learning to be patient. I'm not very good at it, but I'm learning to be patient.
It's a valuable skill, valuable talent, being patient. And if not to interrupt, Sean, I think it's interesting in hearing each of your descriptions of what was important to you when you went into treatment, Bill and Sean. It reminds me of how important it is to have individualized assessments and to offer patients multiple paths, including how much family involvement they would like. And so for Bill, family involvement would have been a tremendous asset and would have really contributed to the treatment. Because Bill wanted it, and his wife wanted to do that too, and so it would have made perfect sense that she should have been involved, and there should have been, couples therapy type of work to some extent. On the other hand, Sean, for whatever reason, he didn't want that. And he had a sense that he needed to be alone. And so for that for him was right. And it reminds me of how important it is. And the critical thing is to not rush to judgment, or not judge what other people want or what other people find helpful or useful, even though it might be different than what I would want, And so that's how important it is. And just like with treatment modalities and medication and smart recovery, refuge recovery, AA, cognitive behavioral therapy, whatever, it always helps to have options and to have choices, and for patients to be offered all options and have a choice. The evidence is pretty clear. People who feel that they are in control of their destiny, that they are making informed choices on their health care, tend to have better outcomes in treatment.
But right there,
but I mean, right there, I think is a couple things. But right there is one of the roadblocks in traditional addiction treatment and traditional recovery thought, that if you say that I want to be in control of something, that's immediately looked at as a negative. And if like when I would talk about my wife and my kids and how much I wanted to see them and I wanted them a part of, I was immediately labeled as codependent. You're codependent on one another. So that's the thing. Unless, and a lot of this is based in the whole surrender thing.
You need to just
you're not
surrender.
admitting you're powerless.
Right.
You need to surrender, and until you do that, everything that you do or everything that you exhibit is going to be a negative. And I don't think that's helpful at all. But that's what you're going to run into, even though all of the evidence and everything that we know about counseling and about personal growth says the opposite of those things. And I think that's where, and it's not a 12-step thing. I mean, it's the treatment industry's adoption of 12-step and taking it to an unhealthy level. I don't think that's what they meant when they talked about powerlessness. It's powerless over alcohol, and that's the only time that it's mentioned is in step 1. All the subsequent steps seem to read between the lines that you actually become powerful over your addiction, over whatever substance that is, through the work, which a lot of the 12 steps mimic, CBT. I mean, it's all about behavior change. But I think a lot of people in treatment, like you said, they're essentially just peers. They're a bunch of people that got into recovery through a certain pathway. Typically, it's 12-step. They push that on people, but there's a lot of dogma that's been dumped on top of 12 steps that was never intended to be there. But that's what you get filled with in treatment, to the point that if you come in there as an adult who is, so say you go into treatment, you develop a substance use disorder, or you have problematic substance use at the age of 40, and you go into treatment, up until that point in your life, you probably were a very healthy, responsible professional, and did things really well and were well in control of your life. But you're not going to be treated that way. You're going to be treated as if your entire life has been out of control, and you need to be controlled now and until you relinquish all that control and say that that you don't want to be in control of that. You're never going to heal. So, I mean, there's just such a counterproductive system set up from the gate that I think is geared towards failure instead of success. And Sean and I talk about this all the time. We still see this because I'm still in a monitoring program, and everything is designed about controlling me instead of me deciding. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, I was just going to say, like, we're in a unique position because when you're in a healthcare professional monitoring program, all the stuff you're talking about is magnified many-fold, right? Because a doctor or a nurse trying to take back their will and direct their life in any way is considered a real liability and a danger.
And a red flag.
And a major red flag, right? Because, you're smart, you're capable. If we give this person a license, right, what are they going to do? They're going to be running rampant, through the hospital, causing chaos and damage, which we know for the most part is not true.
Right.
But it's that is the thing, right? And there, the monitoring program is protecting the public, quote unquote. From us, so that is an extra bad quality, taking back your will, not surrendering, not admitting powerlessness when you're a healthcare provider. That makes you,
and it's not something we're used to doing.
No, it's not. Not at all.
And I don't mean that I mean that in a positive way. I mean,
as healthcare professionals, what we do, people come to us with the expectation, people come to us with chaos and expect that we know how to handle that chaos. So everything about our identity as that in that profession has to do with controlling chaotic environments. So to think that we're in complete chaos, I mean, that's a massive undertaking to try to dismantle that.
Well, it's like everybody is treated to the extreme, like there's just an assumption that you were at the extreme end,
sure.
And you've got to squeeze everybody, like Patrick, you were talking about having many paths, right? I mean, that's the way. Yeah. But health programs, there is one path, and that path caters to the most extreme situation or clinical case. And as long as you go through that, everything's fine, because there's just no gray. It's like it's all or none, and that's just not how substance use disorders work, mental health, issues work.
Everything's on a spectrum.
Yeah, everything's on a spectrum, but that's not how that's treated. And one of the things I heard you talk about, Patrick, just shifting gears, is your mindset seems to be very harm reduction-y, so to speak,
Absolutely.
which I love, clearly, and I know Bill loves too. And it's just like when I hear you talking about, you're basically saying meet people where they're at, show them many paths, guide them, build power within them to make choices that are right for them in their life. Yeah. Like I love this stuff. Is that like common in a family therapist? Because it's something unique, something really special that I don't think I've heard before.
Yeah, I wish it was common. I mean, it's interesting. You hear it like in the social work profession. One of their values is meeting people where they're at and empowering people, and the whole concept of self-determination is a core value of the social work profession, which is one of the reasons I'm really happy I trained in social work and why I became a social worker, because I really believe in that, and that nobody else should have the right to tell another person what's best for them or what they need to do, but rather our role as a clinical social worker is to educate, support, and empower an individual to make their best decisions, because they need to take full responsibility for their healthcare decisions, and nobody can really decide for them. And so it's one of the things I love about being a social worker. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've said that to people. I said it to someone today, someone who was pursuing a certain path in treatment, and I said to them, well, I don't agree with your choice. However, much more important than that is that I fully support your need to make that decision, and you go to town with that. You take that and run with that, because you're the only one who can make those decisions for yourself, and I have no right to try to influence it unduly or to try to change your mind. And so it's I probably say it maybe not every day, but a lot of times, and people appreciate that, and they take it as respectful, and people do much better with that kind of approach.
I'm sure they do. I mean, it's funny, both Sean and I mean, that we would consider ourselves harm reductionists, but it's fascinating after really gaining a lot of understanding about what harm reduction is and what it isn't. It's such a no-brainer for us. I mean, it just makes sense. It's like I said, it's how people want to be treated. I don't want you to tell me where you think I should be. I want you to help me figure out where I want to be and walk with me to get there.
Exactly. And in terms of working with families, the intervention, the old style Johnson intervention approach, which is, hitting someone with a sledgehammer and telling them that if they don't get on a plane and fly off to a residential program today, that the family isn't going to talk to them ever again. That kind of approach, what I'm seeing with my families is that most families don't feel comfortable with that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe those are the families that are attracted to something like family addiction coaching. They don't want to give up on a person. They want to continue to have a relationship with their loved one, regardless of whether the loved one is in recovery, is agreeing to treatment, or even wants recovery. They still want to have a relationship. And I oftentimes use the analogy, suppose your loved one had HIV and had developed AIDS, and for whatever reason was refusing to get treatment for the AIDS. Would you turn your back on your loved one? Would you kick them out of the house? Would you cut off any kind of financial support to them? And the families invariably, they say, well, no, why would we do that? I said, bingo. Think about addiction in the same kind of way, and that, let your heart guide you. And so these families, when they hear that there's another approach other than detachment, which is a big part of Al-Anon, versus the Johnson intervention model, which is controlling that other person, they love hearing about this harm reduction option. And you can see the relief coming from them. You can see it over the phone. I do all this work over the phone, so I can't literally see it, but you hear their sense of relief, and they want to learn more about this. Yeah, I still want to have a relationship with my husband, with my wife, with my son, with my father, even though they're not buying what I'm trying to sell them. How can I do that? And we're having a lot of success with that. And that's a real strong part of the family recovery approach. And we teach families how to accept that other person for however they are, whatever their choices are. And that also allows the family to, while they're accepting that, it allows them to turn some of their attention and focus back onto their own self-care, which really helps a lot, because as I explained to the families, maybe you can help your loved one with the addiction if you're not taking care of yourself, but it's a lot harder to do, and a lot of people can't do it. If you can take care of yourself and have a healthy lifestyle and have a boundary and draw a line over and make a decision about what kind of support you're going to offer, then you're going to be much more available to that person with the addiction, no matter how they respond to your outreach. And you won't be so angry, you won't be so resentful. And if there's a family or a client family that I work best with, that I see the best results from the family coaching, that's the family. They don't want to give up. They don't want to reject the person, and they don't want to hear that they're enabling. They don't want to hear that they're codependent. That model doesn't work for them. So when I explain to them there's no such thing, it's such I hear the sighs of relief on the phone. I explain, you're enabling them to live, and it's your choice, and it's my job to help you understand the risks and benefits of different options and help you come to your best decision. And just a quick, interesting story aside. Sometimes I'm faced with a family situation, and there's some people in the family who are supporting a certain kind of approach, maybe the intervention approach. Other members of the family are not interested in doing that. And sometimes it happens that some people are asking me to try to convince, the other member to support this idea of this intervention. And while I may bring it up as an option, I will never try to influence them. And if I'm speaking to that other family member who says, they don't have it in them, or they don't think it's right, they don't feel up to doing an intervention, then I say, thank you. I appreciate your honesty, and that decision is right for you. And so thank you for sharing. Thank you for doing that. So they decided that they're not going to come to the intervention that the other family members want to have. But it's important. Sometimes we bring the families together with conference calling, and we can bring them to a consensus of an approach that makes sense to people, and that can be very helpful. It's a united front kind of thing. And sometimes we can't, or sometimes it just takes longer to come up with a consensus. And with that situation I'm referring to, a few months later, we were at much more of a consensus building step. The intervention didn't work. When the patient found out that they were about to get on a plane to fly far away, they basically jumped out of the car and they said, "What? I didn't agree to this." And it can damage the trust.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a great story, Patrick.
Yeah.
What
Good.
Patrick, what are some what are some some things that you often would like people to know or families to know that maybe they don't? Like I know there's a lot of fear and confusion, especially you have a loved one go into treatment, right? And suddenly, you're being brought into this situation. And I know many families, like I think of a few examples where the family is like, well, you just deal with your problems and everything will be fine. And obviously it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with that? Do you try and engage those families? I mean, I know that that's often a key piece of the puzzle, right? Do you back off? What's your strategy like in that situation?
Well, my strategy, great question, Sean. I try to slow down my rate of speech, and I try to be, I lower my tone of voice, I lower my volume so I can keep myself in check. And I say, there's another way, there's another approach that is available for treatment, for approaching your loved one. Would you like to hear about it? And there are other approaches that are finding a lot of success. Would you? And then sometimes they say yes. Sometimes they say, no, I know what I want to do. I don't want to hear anything about that. A common one is, I don't want any medication. I don't want to exchange one drug for another. That's crazy. That's the last thing I want to do. And there's a real backlash against medication, and it's still out there. I get calls all the time from people who want to get into treatment, and I always broach the idea of, especially with opioid use disorder, about how medications have been proven to improve the mortality rate by 70%. And usually people don't want to hear it. It's like they've been brainwashed by the culture, by our society, into thinking that medication is just a bad thing. So I run into that a lot, Sean. And I think what it is that the whole treatment industry in our society, we're so programmed and we're so wired to look for easy, quick solutions that if someone comes along and says, something, there are nuances, and it might not be that simple. You might want to consider this, you might want to consider that. Most people don't want to hear that.
Right.
And the conventional wisdom with addiction treatment makes it pretty simple. Basically, the treatment centers say, send your loved one to us for 30, 60, 90 days, and we will cure them. They'll be much better off. And families at that point, most of them are ready for a break. So they like the idea of somebody going away for even if it's just a week, because it gives them a respite, it gives them some relief. And people who work in treatment programs, they don't like nuance. They don't like shades of gray. They like black and white. So that's what these families and patients hear from the treatment providers who are considered experts, that we know how to do it. This is tried and true. In a lot of cases, I'm an example of that. You can trust your loved one with our program. And I mean, what family is not going to want to hear that kind of reassurance? It's a hollow reassurance, but they don't know that. So there's what we're really fighting against, that conventional wisdom, and we're introducing the complexity and nuance. And maybe the idea of sending your loved one out to Hazelden in Minnesota, against their wishes, maybe that's not the best approach. It takes sometimes a special kind of person to hear that and to say, I've been wondering that myself. There's something about this deceptive approach and this strong arm approach that I don't really feel comfortable with. I know the doctor's recommending it, the the counselor, the interventionist is recommending it, but I just don't feel comfortable with it. Isn't there something else? And so I'm gentle with people, and I also say you with the families, you need to make your own decisions about what you pursue. I'm available. And sometimes I hear from them a year later, and they tried it in a certain kind of way of not really addressing it, but then the condition deteriorated. A year later, they call up and they say, things aren't going so well. Can we talk to you at this point? And of course, I welcome them and do an update and say, okay, how would you like to proceed? And that can be very helpful. So it's the kind of thing where you plant seeds and you hope that they grow. You hope that people do well, whatever approach.
And you water those seeds.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you nurture them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to treat patients and families with respect and dignity, to support them making their best decision, even if you're thinking, oh my God, no chance in hell, but to support them in doing that and to wish them well and to say, I'd like to hear how things are going in the future. I mean, imagine what kind of response that can elicit in a family or a patient, to feel supported no matter what I decide to do. That's be
powerful.
It'd be so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? The other question I had for you is there's kind of a bit of a movement away from treatment altogether and keeping people in the community and engaging in recovery centers and doing intensive outpatient. I mean, clearly for some cases you would need treatment, but that there are some people saying that's kind of going to be kind of a rare event, right? That keeping people out with their families, maybe still working while they're getting treatment is the way forward. Is that something you think is sustainable or something that could be the future of substance use disorder care?
It's interesting. I've become aware there's a program in certain parts of New England that will actually send professionals into your home to basically do medically supervised withdrawal, to do what is typically called rehab. They come to your home and do all of that for however long you need it, like a visiting nurse would do, which appeals to a lot of people. Some people don't want to go away. Now, I to tell you the truth, I haven't seen a track record for that particular program. It seems like it might be challenging to manage for patient safety and monitor patients, but it is something that I just learned about, say, a month ago. So, and that speaks to what you said, Sean, that there's a movement away from residential programs at a distance to something that could even be in your own home. Now, one of the problems that I'm sure you guys have seen this as well is sometimes you go away to a distant program and oftentimes there's no aftercare set up, and basically when your stint is done, you get on a plane, you come home, and the family doesn't know what the aftercare plan is. They don't know what they should be doing, how they should approach you. They tend to they're standoffish. They don't want to upset a person, and they're really in the dark. And as we know, it usually involves ongoing aftercare, of a quality aftercare program of some type to help a person sustain their recovery and continue to gain in health and wellness. And so often those linkages are not made, they're not set up when someone is in residential treatment at a distance, that it falls through pretty soon after discharge. Now, one way around that is, and at times I am working with the patients, so I'll be on the phone and I'll insist that they schedule an aftercare appointment at a program before the person is discharged, and I'll say, you got to do that, because we know it's so easy to not follow through, to think that we don't need it. People must be tired of treatment after they've been in these intensive programs for so long. I mean, it's probably the last thing that they want to think about, just, being human.
But I guess, I mean, I don't know. It's so funny how, like, the anxiety that rises up in me and that my blood pressure goes up points when we start talking about, like, aftercare, because in my mind, what I hear is, again, this is based on my experience, but it's been repeated over and over again. The aftercare, I have never had, like, you did use the adjective quality. I have never had quality aftercare. All of the aftercare that I've ever gone to was, you go from inpatient to step down to partial hospitalization, down to intensive outpatient to general outpatient. And it's really just an extension of what happens in the treatment centers. It's essentially 12-step facilitated groups, and heavily influenced. And I mean, it was just a gigantic waste of my time to go to these. I don't mean that in a like, I mean that completely seriously.
Looking back,
I was laughing at the wording, Bill. Sorry.
No, but I mean,
That's a first.
My life today would be so much better
had we invested all those hours into quality, group counseling or couples counseling with my wife, individual counseling with a reputable, trained, decent, educated therapist who understands trauma, who understands vicarious trauma with healthcare professionals. All the different complexities that drove my use to begin with, or maybe not drove, but increased my vulnerability and susceptibility to developing a substance use disorder. None of the 12-step facilitation stuff, well, not none of it, maybe a very teeny tiny piece if I had a skilled counselor would have helped on some level, but not to the degree had it been if my aftercare plan wasn't just let's check off IOP and make sure Bill goes, but you know what, Bill could really use a real therapist.
And we don't do
Imagine that. A highly skilled, highly trained, experienced therapist who meets you where you're at and helps you make sense of rebuilding your life.
That's blasphemy.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine the possibilities?
Well, and that's why we need to be measuring outcomes long after people leave treatment, right? We need to be We need to be looking at that time period, not just all right. Thank you very much. We got the cash. Good luck. Here are the meetings in your town. It's much more than, because the quality of the program, really is. Those outcomes in the first year, 2, 3 years, say a lot about the program you went to. But it's your life too, right? And so, how you manage things and giving you tools and quality therapy, everything you just said, Bill. I mean, it's we're missing the boat. We're looking for the quick fix.
Yeah. Well, and everything revolves around substances, right? It's all about, listen, you just got to stop the drugs. You got to stop using. You need to be abstinent. Everything revolves around the particular substance you're using, not the underlying reason. So it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever to get people to stop using a substance, but not even address, but a lot of times we don't even identify why is it that you use in the first place, and then start developing a plan. And I think the two should be in combination with one another, and that's where harm reduction can fit in. That, okay, they're probably going to keep using. How do we keep them from how do we keep them from dying as they're using?
Well, that's your coping mechanism, right?
Sure.
If you're using the substance to manage trauma, pain, whatever it is, and you take it away and you don't give somebody anything else,
that's malpractice.
Tools, strategies. Well, that goes on all day, every day.
Yeah, well, I know it is, but I'm just saying I don't think anybody has ever called out the way that we do addiction treatment and saying what you're doing is cruel and it's horrific punishment for people, and we wouldn't do that to anybody else, and it constitutes malpractice and probably criminal behavior.
And it may put the patient at higher risk of not only resumption of use, but also of suicide.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you think about it, if you can't use the only friend you feel that you've had and your way of coping and getting through the life and, going to the job and dealing with all the BS that we have to deal with every day, if your only coping strategy is gone, is that a life worth living if you don't have anything to replace it?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already answered that, and I don't know about Sean. I believe Sean's in the same boat, but I've lived it. I mean, I sat there in early sobriety with a gun in my hand thinking, I can't do this because I cannot live with the emotions, especially because sometimes in treatment what happens is people tinker around in your head who are untrained and unskilled, and that should have never been tinkered with. I mean, the last treatment center I was in, what they would do is they had a trauma group that was optional, and if you wanted to go, what they would do is they would sign you up for an initial EMDR session. They would do the first EMDR session and then say, okay, now when you're discharged in a couple weeks, you need to go find someone to finish the treatment. And the first EMDR session is completely unpacking all this trauma. I mean, how is that a good idea? But that's what we do typically.
That's malpractice.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And they don't even, you're not even connected with one. It's like, okay, go find one. Just Google it when you get out. And a lot of times they do the initial session is in the first week or two of being there. So you've got 2 to 3 weeks of still sitting in treatment now with all these, memories that have been unpacked and are now front and center, and you're trying to manage those emotions. I mean, that's pure torture to do.
Plus, your brain is trying to heal.
That's true.
As Sean described, he was in a fog for at least a month. Your brain is trying to heal. You don't want to mess with a brain that's trying to heal, do you, Sean?
No. Definitely not.
No.
Yeah,
Definitely
that's like
not.
mad scientist stuff.
Yeah. I read something on Twitter, my favorite source for accurate and useful
You're not alone,
information. Absolutely. If you follow the right people, that's the only way to find out. But it's a physician, an addiction board-certified addiction specialist physician. He wrote a piece in one of the periodicals, and it was about a different way of looking at treatment. And one of his points was asking the patient what their goals are, asking them what they want, what they see as their best possible outcome, and doing that as part of the treatment before you start putting them into the mold and before you start making all sorts of recommendations. And that if you don't do that, which is basically an individualized assessment, if you don't ask people what they want, how can you possibly help them achieve their goals? And I read this, and it was like a blinding light in a good way. It was like, well, yeah, of course.
But how is it 2020? How is it the year 2020, and we need to write things like that?
Yeah. Well,
That's what I can't get over.
That's a revolutionary statement in today's healthcare system, because we're better at telling people what to do. Right, that's what our system's designed to do. You do this,
right.
You do that, and you'll be fine. Or you do this and that, and you'll be deserving of treatment, whatever it is. We're not asking those questions, right?
It's much easier.
It's much easier
for the providers.
It's faster. You can tick the boxes on the EMR and move on. When you say, "Hey, what do you want? What do you need? What's going to make your life better?" That opens up,
But it's amazing to me.
It's amazing to me that we even have to say these things. It's amazing to me that it's not standard of care. I mean, when we talk about this a lot, but it's just amazing how many quote unquote revolutionary things come out that look at this amazing thing that we're doing. We're changing everything. And from a patient perspective, I look at it and go, how the hell have we made it for hundreds of years of medicine, and you're just figuring this out, that I actually want to be treated like a human being?
We're not doing a very good job. I mean, that's the short of it, right? We spent 20% of GDP in this country on healthcare, and the quality is not very good, and the access is not very good, especially for the most marginalized people in our society. It's virtually non-existent. Right. And that's not acceptable. Right. But what does that say about our culture? Our attitudes towards human beings.
Yeah. Right. The way I think about it is right along with you guys. Everybody has a story to tell. And if we stop long enough to listen to our patients, our clients, whatever we want to call them, to listen to people's stories, then that will show us the way as supports, as coaches, as providers, as helpers, as guides, that'll lead us to the answer. When we hear people's stories, and everybody has one, and do we really listen to them? Do we even ask them about their stories?
In general, we don't. But
no, I've never been asked.
But that's the amazing thing is, Patrick, you're doing it. Like you're living it, and you're doing that. In your work, which is tremendous. Is really, it shouldn't be revolutionary, but it is today.
Yes.
And I think it's the path forward. I think I'm preaching to the choir here.
I appreciate that, Sean. And that's what I hear from the families that I'm working with when I become part of the family. And it's very touching. It's very humbling. And it's so cool about this role that I play, that they welcome me into their family. And I'm like a trusted family member. We develop these really close relationships as a coach with the family. And it reminds me of, I came up with this analogy. It's like, if you're shopping for a used car, would you just buy a used car based on what the salesman told you? No, you'd bring it to a trusted independent auto mechanic to have the used car looked at and put through the tests and drills and everything, so that you don't end up sinking a lot of money into that used car later on. So I think of myself as, it's like having a trusted auto mechanic as a member of your family if you need to buy a used car. And the trusted is a critical piece, because it's so hard to know who to trust. But with a family member who's an expert auto mechanic, you're golden. You bring the used car, and your loved one will tell you whether it's any good or not. And so that's an analogy. That's how I think of myself. I'm the trusted auto mechanic in the family.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it, I think.
Yeah, people find it useful.
Especially because it's it's just such an abstract and such a nebulous world. If you have no clue about addiction treatment and you put it into a search engine, and the stuff that comes up, they all quickly seem to look the same. There's no way to tell quality. You have all these goofy certifications and accreditations that a lot of them don't mean anything. It's just such a scam industry. You need someone to guide you through that.
Yeah, exactly. The difference is if you ask a patient who's been in treatment at that facility, what was the family involvement like? What was the equine therapy like? Whatever. That's the only way that you can really hear what's going on. And you guys probably do this as well. When I examine these treatment programs' website, as soon as I see the term substance abuse, I stop looking, because I know they're using stigmatizing language. So I don't care if they've got, accreditation, if they're licensed, if they report equine therapy and cognitive behavioral and evidence-based. Oh, evidence-based. That's another warning sign. Evidence-based, right?
Well, equine therapy. As soon as I see that, I'm done.
So I need now I have to go through therapy now because I did equine therapy.
Hold on, I like the equine therapy. I enjoyed it.
Oh my gosh! That's why Sean and I are a good team, because I roll my eyes and go, that's the most ridiculous thing in the world, and Sean's like, oh no, man, it was cool. And
it was a little bit. You know what I really
when you're terrified of horses, though.
Yeah, well,
I'm right there with you, Bill.
But
I'm afraid of dogs.
Yeah. Well,
I'm afraid of dogs.
Well, there are emotional support dogs.
Well, no, I saw so many equine accidents in the ER at Penn that I was terrified that one of the things was going to kick me. I'm like, I already got enough problems. I can't stop doing heroin. I don't need to be kicked by a horse.
Yeah, this thing is 10 times the size of me. And look for the stigmatizing language, because if you look hard enough, it might take a few pages to go through, but most times you'll find it, and then that lets you know they're not up with the current research on the correct terminology, and that abuse is a legal term to connote causing damage, and abuse is done by bad people. And that's when you know to just keep looking.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you just knocked out about 95% of the treatment centers that are out there. So
it's true. Yeah.
No, I would say that's probably conservative estimate too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We would never get sponsored.
That being said, there are some treatment centers that are trying to do a good job and trying to, get in line with best practices,
Yeah.
But it's the problem is it's a complex disease. And like we say over and over, there is no one solution or one path. There's no cookie cutter approach.
Right.
And it's in healthcare, we want algorithms, right? We want, a simple flow chart that guides us down some, clinical path. And I always say, substance use disorders are some of the most complex and challenging diseases out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even the idea of it being a disease, is there's a lot of debate around that too. Is it a learning disorder? There's a bunch of different. It's very it's challenging and complex. And it's not easy, but many treatment centers do a tremendous amount of harm. I think many are trying to do a good job, but it's hard wading through, pulling the weeds apart and trying to find, especially when you're hurting or a loved one's struggling, or if you yourself are struggling, to find the right place,
Right.
And I ended up, I think, overall in a good place, despite some of the things, my comments. I ended up in a really good place, but I ended up in a good place because I had a family member who is, has a background in psychiatry, psychiatric nursing, who knew some people, and I had a referral, right? And they knew some people that went there and had a good experience.
You had the trusted auto mechanic in the family, right. Sean. That's exactly what I mean.
That's what I had, and most people don't have that.
Exactly.
And I was lucky. So,
And what I would agree with you, Sean. Recently, there's a program in Massachusetts that just started offering Suboxone initiation in the residential program that up until a couple of years ago, nope, never had it, never wanted to have it. So, and I was shocked to hear that. So, yeah, I do think that there is some change. It's happening slowly, but when I heard that was amazing, and I was surprised, and I congratulated them. Now, and it also reminds me of another role for a family addiction coach, is that oftentimes I'm coaching families on how to try to interface with the treatment center. And for example, Bill, with you and Trish and the difficulties that you all had, if Trish had someone in my kind of role who could advise her as to how to approach the treatment center, it might have helped. She could have gotten some guidance about how to approach this, how to try to get a couples meeting, a family meeting set up, try to, learn about the aftercare kind of thing. So that's also another role that I play, that I find. And basically, if you think it's okay to breathe a sigh of relief when your loved one enters a residential program, but the hard work is just begun. And so the families can really benefit from someone who is objective and knowledgeable, like the auto mechanic in the family, who can advise them on how to continue to interface with their loved one and with the treatment programs and with any providers after that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. I mean, I guess that's probably a good spot to start wrapping up. It's been we're like an hour and a half, so I think this was really great. I mean, this is something that, we've never addressed, and I don't think I've never heard anybody else talk about the role of the family. It's usually an excluded role, and for both Sean and I, it's been critical in our recovery and in our family's recovery. I mean, I think Sean's probably in the same boat I am, that we don't really identify as a person in recovery. It's we're a family in recovery. And so it's really great, Patrick, the work that you're doing up there, that you're your specialty area that you're focusing on, the family as a unit recovering instead of just the individual. And I think that's the future and the right way to go.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much power when you harness it. I mean, when, with healthy families, which most families with addiction are totally healthy and loving, and when you can make use of that and, have meetings to break the ice and talk about what it's going to be like when the person comes home again, it just makes so much sense. And I mean, one more thing is that, there's also this idea, and you described doing it, Sean, that you continue to learn about the impact on the family over time. And that's so positive. It's so healthy that you're addressing that you're dealing with that. And I think a lot of people don't, even though they may be in a recovery. But it's kind of like, that's tough stuff to look backwards and to be addressing, hurt feelings or, things that we might have caused another person to feel hurt or betrayed or whatever. I mean, that's tough stuff to deal with. And so good for you that you value that and that you're open to that and that you are still exploring that. And it sounds like you always will. That's really great stuff. That's really healthy.
Yeah, we agree. And so Patrick, thanks for coming on. We really appreciate your insight and you spending the time with us. And so I guess, how can people reach you? How can people hear your podcasts?
Patrick, let's see. Well, probably the simplest way is to go onto my website at familyaddictioncoach.com, and they can find my podcast there. There's also a way to reach me, reaching out with a web contact. My phone number contact is on the website as well. So it's familyaddictioncoach.com.
Great. All right, well, we'll put links in the show notes so that people can get in touch with you. And so, once again, just thanks so much for coming on. This was a
boatload of fun to chat with you.
My pleasure, and I'm glad that I could contribute.
Thank you for listening to Health Professionals in Recovery. Please visit our website at www.healthprosinrecovery.com and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter at HPIR Podcast. If you are struggling with substance use disorder and need help, please call the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration at 1-800-662-4357. Take it from us, people can and do recover.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Family Addiction Coaching. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the show. We'll continue to interview interesting and strong families as long as there is a need for this information in the community. Make sure to visit our website, www.opioidcoaching.com. If you think you might want professional coaching for yourself or your family, Patrick Doyle is available. Have a peaceful day.